Hello, everybody, and welcome along to the fourth in our Unplugged live series. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by the very lovely and wonderful Elise. Now, Elise is an Orthodox Jew, and so she's going to be sharing her experience of Shabbat with us and how that helps us to, or helps her particularly, to unplug and find that time and that space to really dedicate to that which really truly matters and what's really important to her. So we're going to be having a wonderful conversation today. I do hope if you are around that you'll stick around, maybe get the cuppa and grab a seat, get comfortable. I'm just waiting for Elise to join on in now, so give it a moment or so. Hope everyone's been doing okay in these weird and wonderful times that we're at, regardless of where in the world that you are situated. And just see if Elise is ready to join. Just waiting for a few more to pop on in before we do kick off our chat today. Hello, if you've just joined, welcome to our Unplugged live series. We're excited to get started. Hello. Just giving it a minute or so while we're just waiting on Elise to join on in and for our chat today. There we go. I just see that Elise has joined, so she should be coming on. Good old technology. There we go. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Elise?
Good. Apologies for that. It's my first Instagram live, so just some technical difficulties, but figured it out.
That's all good. It's always a fun time trying to figure out the whole technology situation. It never seems to play ball, regardless of all the things that you put in place.
Exactly. But I'm here, so that's what's most
You
important,
are.
and I'm really
You,
excited to be part of it today.
you are, and I'm delighted that you're here too. So I did just give a bit of a brief introduction before you hopped on, but maybe, well, what I do like to start these conversations off with is a bit of a check-in first and foremost. And we started all the conversations like this. And just seeing how it is that you're going today, if you were to say from a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is, pretty awful, to 10 is feeling incredible and amazing, where do you reckon you're sitting today?
So I would say I'm probably sitting at an 8 today, which is hasn't necessarily been the case for, every day during lockdown, but I have to be honest, I was pretty pumped to be part of this today. It's definitely not something that I usually do. I'm usually very much, in front of a screen writing and designing and meeting with clients. So I guess I was actually really excited to participate in something a little bit different. So it gave me a boost of energy when I woke up this morning.
Awesome. That makes me feel very happy that you're excited because we're excited to have you. And how do you reckon, I guess, if you were to look at it then over the past 18 months or so in the midst of this pandemic, if you were to have an average of, all of that time, where do you reckon you would have been sitting over that period or that period so far? I guess we're still going through it.
Yeah, so it's a great question. So I guess I have a bit of a unique story because I got married basically the day before we went into lockdown in March 2020. So my lockdown experience has been very much sort of running in parallel with my experience of being a newlywed. So there've definitely been some highs and lows, and the beginning was amazing, and we were loving the time, just being in lockdown and being together and all that kind of stuff. Over the year and a half, yeah, it's been highs and lows. I would say maybe an average of 7, with some days being great and some days being a little bit more challenging.
Wow, what an experience. I can't imagine what that must have felt like to go from, the highs of the wedding and all that comes with it, and that honeymoon period, as they call it, going straight into it and then finding out that we were in lockdown. But I guess you definitely got to spend some time together.
Definitely, definitely. And I mean, look, that's probably a whole other story and a whole other conversation in and of itself. But we were supposed to get married
Mm.
overseas, and we couldn't travel, and my parents couldn't come, and it wasn't your typical wedding. It ended up being a small, COVID safe, 20 people outdoor, kind of backyard experience. So that was definitely a story as well.
Yeah, wow. I can't imagine that. We were very, very lucky. We got married in 2019, and to think about, all that we were able to do, that you just took so much for granted. And then to think that, if it had been a few months later, that none of that would have been possible. It blows my mind. And my heart definitely goes out to anyone who is either planning or in the midst of a wedding prep at the moment. It's a difficult time to try and navigate that sort of thing.
Definitely.
Hmm.
And it's crazy for me to think that, we're a year and a half later and people are still having the same conversations that I had a year and a
Mm.
half ago.
I know, I know. So I'd love, for anyone who may be watching, whether live or a little bit later on, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you, and I guess just to tell us a bit about you. Who is Elise? What has kind of been your journey to date, to get to this point?
Sure. Yeah, so I guess it's always a challenging question. I guess, you feel like in an interview, where do you start? But I guess in terms of my identity, I'm Canadian, I'm an Orthodox Jew, I'm a wife. Um, I'm part of a family. So I think those are really sort of the crucial parts of my identity and who I am. And in terms of my day to day, I work at a startup called Easy Bills as a partner manager. So I work in marketing, work sort of with a number of different stakeholders sort of connected to the business. So one is the accountants and bookkeepers, who primarily use the software and recommend it to their clients. And I also work with some of the other technology companies that we partner with and we integrate with to build on that relationship and to talk about opportunities for cross collaboration and working together. Um, so I guess that's kind of professionally who I am. And look, I think I was always one of those people that said my favorite thing to do in my spare time is to just spend time traveling. And, for many years, I spent every minute that I wasn't working, traveling, exploring a different country, a different city. So I guess that's obviously been difficult in the past year and a half. It's something that I haven't been able to do. And guess I've had to find some other hobbies and other things to keep me busy while I can't spend my vacation traveling.
What made you come over to Australia? As you mentioned, you're Canadian. So how did you get from Canada all the way over here?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it actually works well now that I can say that a 6 month backpacking trip has turned into 6 years of life and living. So similar to possibly many others, I came over as a backpacker. I've been working for a number of years in a not-for-profit, and I was quite burnt out and just ready for a bit of a change. And I just said, like, I couldn't figure out what my next steps were in my career. I didn't know really what I wanted to do, and where I could take my skills and what those transferable skills were. So I just thought that I would take 6 months, come to Australia, backpack by myself, recalibrate my life and then decide, what I wanted to do when I got home. And yeah, that was November 2015. So we're approaching on 6 years. And within the first week of being in Australia, I got offered a job and found a flatmate. And it just quickly turned from a backpacking trip to just life. And then, eventually met my now husband. And it looks like I'll be here for the long run.
Yeah, it's amazing how many stories you hear like that. And I was laughing, as you said, just like so many others, I'm definitely one of those. I came for a year and I'm 9.5 here now, I think, and counting. So, yeah, it definitely creeps up in you, that's for sure.
Definitely.
Mm.
It's a great place to live, and I'm really, yeah, really grateful to be here.
Mm. And I mean, we touched on a little bit there, your religious background and being an Orthodox Jew. And, I know when we were having conversations before, we were talking about this notion of unplugged and how, how we as human beings can take that opportunity to step away maybe from the technology or to slow things down, whether that's something that's actually intentional, that's come from our own volition, or whether that's something that maybe by circumstance and, say for this lockdown, that ability to actually just slow down has kind of been forced upon us in a little ways. But also for you, I know we touched on a little bit about, the different traditions that come with being an Orthodox Jew that helps you actually being able to do that. So I'd love you to share a little bit more about your experience, I guess, from that perspective, and I guess the benefits of that you found throughout your journey so far.
Definitely. Yeah, so I guess when I saw that you were sort of looking for people to share their experiences of unplugging in various ways, I was really excited to sort of talk about my story, because I think there's a lot of people that seem to talk about Orthodox Jews in the media, but I find less of people themselves having the opportunity to actually share their story. And I definitely don't want to discount any of the personal kind of sensationalized accounts that have been sort of floating around the media lately. But I think, people sharing positive stories is also something that's really important. There's a few main sort of tenets of sort of being an Orthodox Jew in terms of practices, but really one of the main ones is keeping the Sabbath. And we've got sort of a quote in our tradition that says, the more that the Jews have kept the Sabbath has kept the Jews. And kind of this symbiotic relationship that, the more we sort of follow the rules and rituals associated with it, the more that it's been able to really preserve us as a people throughout all of history. And so I guess the parts that are relevant for our conversation is really just that complete unplugging from technology. So, no computers, no phones, no cars, really sort of taking a step back and disconnecting from all of these kind of modern, technological distractions, and really having the ability to focus on friends and family and rest and really recharging.
Hmm. And when you say the Sabbath, when does that fall in your week?
Yeah, sorry, great question. So it's basically a 25-hour period from sunset on Friday until sunset on Saturday. So depending on the time of year, those hours fall slightly differently. So, this time of year, it'll fall approximately from 5:30 on Friday night until 6:30 on Saturday night. But again, in the depths of winter, that can sort of start at 4:30 at the earliest, and in the summer, it started late as around 8:30 or 9. So it really goes based on when the sun goes down one night and when it goes down again the next night.
And I know now, we've talked about the positive stories that come as a result of that and the benefits, but is that something that you always recognized, or was it something, that you ever rebelled against or felt resentful for, or was it always something in your eyes, that you felt was the right thing to do and was helpful?
So it's a great question. So, well, I've always been Jewish since I was born. I didn't grow up being Orthodox, and so I was traditional, and there were certain customs and traditions that we observed in our home and in our family. And I went to a school where I learned a number of the traditions and customs and rituals as well. But it was really only when I was a university student, when I was about 18, that I actually took on the sort of Orthodox lifestyle and started doing things in sort of the strict way that I do now. So there was never a chance to rebel, because it was really a choice that I made. And I think for me, it makes it easier, because I know that if I chose tomorrow not to do that, I would have that choice. There was never any pressure from my family or my community to sort of take that on. And I think for me, that's made it even more empowering to know that it's really a lifestyle choice for me and something that I strongly believe in.
Yeah, wow. And so that's something that was completely of your own volition then. It wasn't something that your family also took on at the same time or anything like that?
So I do have a sister who took it on around the same time. She's 2 years younger than me, and she took on a lot of these different values and practices around the same time that I did. But it really was coincidental. Our journeys were very different. We were learning sort of in different communities with different rabbis. And she's, probably even more religious than I am now. So it was really two separate things. And our parents are still traditional and thankfully very supportive of who we are and what we've taken on, but they're not Orthodox to the same standard that we are.
Hmm. Interesting. It's incredible, isn't it, that you guys have you and your sister, you both had that pivotal moment where you decided to take this step towards changing, so much of what it is that would have been your everyday, and you did it similar times, but it was not necessarily a parallel journey. Incredible sometimes how that happens within families.
Definitely. And look, and there's definitely challenges. There's, logistical challenges, so another big aspect of Orthodox Judaism is around food and what you're allowed to eat and not mixing meat and milk and not eating, for example, pig products. And so there's also social ramifications of some of these decisions as well. So, you'd always have a group of friends that would go out for lunch on a Saturday, and all of a sudden, you can't join with your friends, or you can't go back to your favorite restaurant because the food they're serving is not kosher. So there's the ideological sort of spiritual component of it, but then there also ends up being a lot of these practical sort of conversations that need to be navigated. And that can sometimes be the most difficult part, because I know for me that I was making choices based on what was important for me and what I wanted to do, but figuring out a way to explain to your friends that, you're not joining them without offending them can sometimes be really challenging.
Yeah, and how did you navigate that?
So I think with honesty, and I guess there was a bit of a sort of transition. So like at the beginning, I would maybe go with them, but choose not to eat certain foods or come late or leave early, depending on the circumstance of what it was and where it was and how it was. And then there was a while that I would go and I would just order a Coke and just, drink with them, and they would eat their meal. Until I really sort of built up the confidence to just say, this isn't an environment that I'm comfortable being in anymore. How about we go to a restaurant that is kosher? Or how about we hang out on a different day? Or, let's catch up on the phone instead, or whatever it is. So it's definitely not something that just happened overnight. And I'm really grateful that the vast majority of my friends were really understanding and sort of able to work through that process with me.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, my hat goes off to you. I find, whether it's from a religious perspective or from a spiritual perspective or from, a lifestyle choice, and that so often hear stories of people either that I work with or that, are part of community or that, are in my own peer network and who make quite drastic changes, in their lives. And the intention behind why it is that they do certain things is absolutely for the greater good, in terms of there's such a positive reason or rationale behind why it is that they're doing, whether it's for their own well-being or for the well-being of others. And it's incredible how often you hear stories of a real resistance being met with that and from other people. And not necessarily, what I find is that the resistance that comes can often so much be because I think choosing the path less traveled or choosing a different way of life or being or showing up in the world, often what it does is causes a real discomfort in people because, sometimes, and I'm not necessarily saying this was your experience, but can often bring up this feeling of, well, what's wrong with the way I'm going about my life, and are you saying that this isn't good enough, or there's a reason why you should be doing something other than what you're doing? But I think it's very much dependent on that open communication and that conversation piece, because I think, if you come at a conversation with your stuff and I come at a conversation with my stuff and we try and meet somewhere in the middle. Often things get lost in translation. But as you said, if you can have those open and honest conversations where you come from a place of, this is really why this is important for me, and, or help me understand how that impacts you, or, how does that make you feel? Sometimes that can be really helpful, but often that's the part that's missing. And that can sometimes lead to be for people to feel incredibly isolated in different choices that they make. So, yeah, I'm glad to hear that, you've been able to have those conversations, and that the friends who are really truly your friends and that care about you, are still in the fold because they understand that that's a meaningful choice for you.
Sure. And look, I'm not going to say that I didn't encounter any resistance. I definitely, encountered some resistance from, from my family at the beginning, and from some friends. And what you touched on, I think was definitely where some of the resistance, especially from my parents, may have been coming from. Like, they did the best at raising me and giving me everything they could and everything they knew. And yeah, I think at times they did sort of see it as a bit of a rebellion, or is it, is the way we taught you not good enough, or is the sort of Judaism we gave you not good enough or not enough? And, at the time when I was becoming more Orthodox, I was living with my parents. So it even made it, a little bit more difficult. And not only was I taking on this new way of life, but I was sort of, taking it on while living in the same house as them. And, that can also pose some sort of logistical challenges. But I'm really, really grateful that, we were able to kind of, work things through, and my parents were able to sort of make their kitchen, kosher to a degree that I was comfortable eating there, and be respectful of my choices, for example, keeping the Sabbath, even though, they necessarily weren't keeping the Sabbath at the same time. We're able to sort of, create an environment where I had space in the house to do what I needed to do, and they had space in the house to do what they needed to do.
Beautiful. So with the Sabbath, I'd love you to tell me a little bit more about that, because you touched on how it gives you this incredible opportunity, which we don't often get, in these lives of ours, these modern, busy, technology-based lives that we lead in modern world, to really disconnect and to switch off, and to have that time to turn that attention of your focus inward a little bit, and or also around the people that you love or care about the most. So what are some of the practices, or how do you spend your time, I guess, during that Sabbath in a way that's helpful for you, and how it is that you recharge to move into the rest of your life and meet those demands?
Definitely. So it is quite of a structured day, and I guess, lockdowns have made it incredibly difficult with, synagogues being closed, and, not being able to gather with friends or family outside of our homes. But I guess we'll put the sort of lockdown experience aside for a moment. So I guess traditionally when the Sabbath comes in, there's some rituals that we do. And so one of them is that traditionally the female of the household light candles as a way of sort of bringing light into the home. And in the past, that would have been, the source of light. Now we do, have actual lights on that we use. But it's a tradition that we've kept to sort of bring that like additional measure of light into our homes. And there's a series of prayers that we say, which I guess the translation in English would translate to like bringing in the Sabbath, and sort of, I guess, welcoming the special day, and sort of saying prayers that talk about, that we're sort of excited to bring in the Sabbath, and that it sort of came around again this week. And so again, normally those would be said in synagogue. In lockdown, people just say those prayers usually at home by themselves. And then we have a traditional, we call it Shabbat dinner, or Friday night dinner. And it's usually quite an elaborate meal. There's sort of a custom or an idea in Judaism that we use wine and meat to enhance our joy. So it's usually kind of a larger meal with, mains and sides, and chicken soup is a traditional sort of food that we eat on Friday night. And And again, when it's not locked down, it's very much accustomed to invite friends and family into your home, and also invite people that might not be friends and family into your home. So for example, when I was backpacking in Australia, when I first came, I was in, different communities on the Sabbath, and there were places where I didn't necessarily know anybody, and I was able to just contact the local synagogue in places, for example, like Brisbane, and just say like, hi, I'm a backpacker, I don't have anywhere to go for the Sabbath, and the rabbi and his family invited me to his home and gave me a beautiful meal. So there's also really this value of welcoming guests and welcoming people who just, who are single or who are from out of town or who need a place to go. And in the earlier years of my time in Melbourne, I was very fortunate to be hosted by many, many families who welcomed me into their home and fed me, but it sort of fed me sort of physically and spiritually. So, there's a beautiful meal there to eat, but there's also the sort of, spirituality of the day and, help teach me some of their family's customs and rituals. So that's Friday night. It's usually a big meal, often goes quite late. And then Saturday morning is usually a bit of a sleep in, and then again, usually synagogue in the morning. Now sort of prayers at home. And then there's a second sort of meal, which is called like Shabbat lunch. And so again, it's another meal. We do a lot of eating. Another meal of, usually meat. And we eat a special stew that's called cholent. So one of the things that you're also not allowed to do is cook. So you can't turn on the stove or the oven or any sort of flame. And so one of the things we do, especially in the winter, to sort of keep warm, is we have what's called a cholent, or basically a slow cook dish. And so what we do is on Friday, before the Sabbath starts, we put the food in the slow cooker, and then it cooks all night, and then we eat it on Sabbath lunch. And so that's kind of a way that we can have a warm meal without having to actually do any of the cooking or preparing on the Sabbath, because all of that work is done beforehand. And I guess that's another thing to mention, that, not only do we stay away from, work like technology, we also stay away from work like cooking. And so it makes Friday a bit of a hectic day to, make sure that all the food as well has to be prepared and ready. But it also means that when you get to the day, like everything is just prepared, and it just makes it really relaxing. So there's, Sabbath lunch, and again, an opportunity normally to connect with friends and family. And then often in the afternoon, especially in the summer when it's longer afternoons, people will go to the park, they'll play games, they'll invite friends over, they'll go for walks. Any of those types of activities are pretty acceptable. And then towards the end of the Sabbath, there's another little bit of prayers, and then there's another ceremony that we do with a candle. So we sort of bring in the Sabbath with candles, and then we end the Sabbath with a different type of candle called the Havdalah candle, that basically, again, separates the end of the Sabbath from the rest of the week.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. It's been so interesting listening to your experience of it. And I think there's a lot of lessons that can be learned, absolutely, from, the Sabbath and honoring that, and that just way of slowing down, and it doesn't necessarily need to be in something as formalized as that, if that's not necessarily, your religious way of being. But there are so many elements that are incredibly helpful if we could start to incorporate some of that into our everyday, just where we can, and that idea of actually taking intentional time to rest, because often we just don't do that in these lives of ours, and we expect that we can always kind of run on autopilot and wonder why we're exhausted at the end of the week before starting it all over again.
For sure. I used to work with university students in Toronto, and many of them were sort of in the process of learning more about religion or becoming more religious and trying to understand. And we ran this activity one time with them where we were sort of away for the weekend, and we actually gave them little sleeping bags, and they had to put their phones in these little sleeping bags and kind of tuck them away for the Sabbath. And I always just think back to that activity that we did, because it was this really sort of physical reminder of like, we're putting our phones to sleep with these little sleeping bags so that we can also have a chance to kind of rest and recharge. And there's scientific proof to it. So for example, if you're out for lunch with somebody and your phone is on the table, you're going to be less engaged in that conversation. That's just science. You're going to be distracted, whether or not it's ringing, whether or not there's text messages coming through. You're just going to be more distracted by it. So, I agree. I'm definitely not here to advocate that everybody should become an Orthodox Jew. Definitely not. But what I do think is important to share is to be mindful of technology. And that's one of the things that this lifestyle has made me do. It's made me become more mindful of technology. And, it's made me realize that I can sit at lunch with a friend for 2 hours and I can keep my phone on silent in my bag, and really focus on 2 hours to engage with somebody. And I think that's something that everyone is able to do.
Absolutely. When's the last time that so many of us have actually pressed the off button on our devices? And I know even in the past when I've run retreats and been part of silent retreats, for example, at the very beginning, you have to hand off your phone. You can't have it for the period of time that you're there. And I find it so fascinating to watch that resistance in people, and I feel it too. I'm not exempt from that, of actually handing it over and just watching just this last thing, one more thing, and it's incredible when you think and how long phones have actually even been around. What do we do before phones? We actually sat and we had those deeper, more meaningful and more engaged conversations because we were fully present with the other person, and the level and the quality of that connection or that relationship is strengthened so much because of that. And that device, it's almost like putting a full wall in between you and the other person often. So yeah. So I'm just conscious of the time. It's absolutely flown this conversation, and I've been so intrigued and so interested, and really appreciate you sharing your experience with me and with anyone who's watching either today or later on. I guess before we do wrap up, I'd love to just know, if there's any way that we could be of service to you in some way, or something that you might have an ask of either me or anyone who's watching today.
So I guess there's a couple of things. One, I think, is just be mindful of technology. Like, I think one of the challenges, like we've spoken about, is people just feel so glued. And I think living this lifestyle has made me realize that, for 25 hours, I can put a phone aside. I've never lost a job because of it. I've never, been late on any major project because of it. Like, I've never had any major pushback from friends or family. So I think if I can do it for 25 hours, then I think it's possible for everybody for an hour or two to focus on some intentional kind of, non-tech time, especially during lockdown. We're so connected to our devices for everything. And I think the other thing is just remember that there's two sides to every story. I was trying to decide whether I wanted to talk about it or not, but I'm sure a lot of people have sort of seen or heard of My Unorthodox Life, which is on Netflix now, and it presented a very sort of one-sided, sensationalized view of one person's story, and I definitely wouldn't want to discount her story and her experience. But I think it's important for people to remember that there's definitely another side of the story, and there are many, many, many Orthodox women like myself that are, very observant, keep all of the rituals and traditions very, very strictly, and also have lives and families and work in tech companies. And I just want people to remember that those two things don't need to be mutually exclusive.
Yeah, I think, that's incredibly important, that with awareness of anything, you gain that understanding, and to always question things, and keep your eyes open. I think often we can very much have a very blinkered way of walking around the world, and we kind of see just, what's out in front of us often, but to ask questions, to educate yourself in different ways, to have the conversations, like for me, this was incredibly illuminating and helpful, and for me, in better understanding my own knowledge too, you know, and something that, you know, questions that I've maybe always had but never had that opportunity to ask or understand more about. And yeah, I think there, as you said, there's always two sides to a story. So just keep the eyes and the ears open, and listen and ask. And yeah, I'm so grateful for you to take this time to share your experience with me. It's been really, really interesting, and I've loved the chat. So yeah, thank you.
No problem. Thanks so much for having me. I've really enjoyed sharing as well.
Awesome. Well, take care, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Sounds great. Bye.
Thanks, Elise. Bye. Thanks, everybody.